Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us from your corner of the world today. My name is Farah Arabi, and on behalf of Make Mothers Matter, I welcome you to our official virtual solutions session for the second World Social Summit taking place physically in Doha, Qatar this week. Our event today is titled Shifting the Paradigm, Centering Care, Society, and Social Protection for Social Development, which will highlight the synergy between care and support systems and social protection as a key accelerator of social development. To offer us the background on the role of care and support policy for social development, I would like to introduce Roberto Vicio for some opening remarks. Roberto is the international representative of the Third World Institute, a nonprofit research and advocacy organization based in Uruguay that serves as host or secretariat to several international citizen initiatives, including Social Watch and the Global Coalition for Protection Floors. Welcome, Roberto.
Roberto, we can't hear you. Roberto, your mic.
Sorry about that. And thank you for that presentation. Salam alaikum, everybody. Greetings from Doha, where the second social summit is starting now. 10 years ago, the parliament of my country, Uruguay, adopted a law recognizing the right to care and to be cared for as a fundamental right of every person. This was the result of many years of campaigning by the women organization, the women's movement, which then convinced the trade unions to join them. And ultimately, the whole of society was on board, and the law was passed unanimously by Parliament, which is not a minor thing. There are 4 political parties represented in Parliament. Not a single one representative voted against it. That law accredited and dignified care work, which is mainly done by women, established some benefits for people needing care, and established a coordination around care of the ministries of social development, health, education, and finance, which is quite important. And many of them were like, what does my work has to do with care? I'm educating. The answer was, hey, you have children in your facilities several hours a day and you don't care for them. Anyhow, everybody should be involved, and that was partially, or to a great extent, a paradigm shift, as this meeting is discussing. Later on, the experience showed that the law was necessary, but not enough. You need political will, and you need adequate budget allocation to make it function. But still, having the right enshrined in national law changed completely the terms of the debate. Care was not just a responsibility of women, but it became a legal duty of the state to support them, reduce the burden, promote a better gender distribution of tasks. Then we had COVID all around the world, and the importance of care became obvious worldwide. In 2022, all of the governments of Latin America and the Caribbean, again unanimously, committed themselves, and I quote, to adopt regulatory frameworks that ensure the right to care through the implementation of comprehensive care policies and systems from a gender, intersectional, intercultural, and human rights perspective. End of quote. This is what the Buenos Aires commitment says. And in that commitment, and I quote again, care, the commitment recognizes care as a right to provide and receive care, and to exercise self-care based on the principles of equality, universality, social and gender co-responsibility, and therefore as a responsibility that must be shared by people of all sectors of society, families, communities, business, and the state. Now, we are here in Doha. The Doha Declaration is going to be launched, that it doesn't go as far as the organized commitment in, for example, recognizing a new right, but it does state that there is a multiplier effect of care and support systems in terms of that they increase labor participation, they facilitate the transition from informal to formal work, decent working conditions in the care and support sector, which, by the way, we know that a lot of that is unpaid work, not just badly paid, which is in the majority of the cases. Ensuring access to social protection for the caregivers and the care receivers throughout the life. And finally, and I am underlining this, investing in social infrastructure and strengthening social protection. Because the Doha Declaration recognizes that there is a return on the investments in care and support policies. Actually, there is research ongoing, some of it already published, and others ongoing in Latin America, led by ECLAC and UN Women, that clearly show that the economic return of investing in care is even bigger than investing in infrastructure, which is the traditional tool that governments have when they need to revitalize the economy. What that means is that care is the right thing to do, but it is also the economically smart thing to do. So this side event will give the opportunity to many experts to explain why this is so and how that can be implemented. Over to you, Farah.
Thank you very much, Roberto, for those opening remarks and for beautifully setting the stage for our panel discussion today. I would like to highlight from your comments, because there is an economic return on this investment is one of the powerful reasons why we want to do it. Shifting a little bit, we're going to start our panel talking about human rights. I would like to introduce our first panelist today, Asako Hattori. Asako is a human rights officer in the Women's Human Rights and Gender section at the United Nations Human Rights Office. She will help us understand the human rights dimension of care and support, as well as the inequalities in the current system. Welcome, Asako, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Farah, and then hello, everyone. Just to start with echoing Roberto's opening, let me begin with a simple truth. None of us can live, thrive, or even survive without care and support. From birth to old age, through crisis and recovery, or just to maintain our daily life. Care and support are the threads that hold our lives together and societies together. Yet we often refer to burden of care. Let me emphasize, care and support is not a burden, and people who require it is not burdened either. Providing and receiving care and support is part of our shared humanity. It is foundational to building a just, inclusive, and sustainable world. However, when care and support systems are organized without respect for human rights, they can become mechanisms of exclusion, exploitation, and disempowerment. That's why we shed light on the human rights dimension of this issue. By now, you must have noticed that I'm using the phrase care and support, not just care. Let me explain why. As Roberto's opening illustrated very well, the concept of care has long been central to women's rights. It highlights gender inequality in caregiving, and it challenges systems that rely on women's unpaid or underpaid work. Feminist movements have called for the transformation of unfair care systems and recognizing a human right to care. Today, this concept even extends to caring for the planet. Care is also central to children's rights. The Convention on the Rights of the Child affirms children's right to care, to be cared for, while recognizing their evolving autonomy in receiving care. So the concept of care is very important. Meanwhile, the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities introduced the concept of support as a distinct from care. The concept of support challenges paternalistic models of care that ignore the rights and the agencies of those receiving assistance. It emphasizes autonomy, choice, and control of those requiring support, and it aims to enable their independent living and community inclusion, not just meet their basic needs. The concept of support is now increasingly relevant beyond disability rights. For example, the rights of older persons. Therefore, this indicates that only care is not enough. We also need concept of support. Therefore, to fully address human rights dimension of this issue, we must speak of care and support, not just care. And let's recall that we play both roles in giving and receiving care and support in our life, as Roberto said, and therefore, all of us need to have both sides of human rights protected. Unfortunately, current systems of care and support often reinforce inequality. First, they perpetuate gender inequality. Women and girls, including those with disabilities, older women and migrant women, carry the bulk of care and support work, both unpaid and paid. Excessive workload and time poverty undermines their well-being, limits their opportunities, and denies their rights. And when women and girls themselves need care and support, their rights are again often overlooked. Second, systems often discriminate based on disability and age. People with disabilities, children, and older persons are often viewed simply as passive dependents of care. Institutional care, such as placing people in care institutions, is often seen as a default, rather than services that respect autonomy of those requiring care and support and promote their community inclusion. Third, care systems reflect historic injustices like colonization and racism. Minority groups, indigenous peoples, and people of African descent have been subjected to harmful policies in the name of care, policies that exploit them or impose them models of care external to them. These forms of discrimination often intersect, deepen inequality, and increases risks of violence, abuse, and exploitation. Moreover, the voices of rights holders, those providing and requiring care and support, are rarely heard in decision-making. To eliminate these inequalities, we must uphold all range of human rights of all those involved in the care and support. UN Human Rights Office's analysis identified a wide range of human rights relevant to care and support. They include rights to non-discrimination, health, education, work, rest, play, equality marriage, family life, independent living, housing, water and sanitation, participation, and freedom from violence, among others. The right to social security, today's focus, is one of them. Then how social protection is relevant to care and support? Social security can recognize unpaid care work through paid parental leaves and care leaves. They also count caregiving time towards pensions. Social security must protect care and support workers, especially domestic, migrant, and informal workers. Social protection can redistribute care responsibility, like Roberto said, through public services like healthcare, education, childcare, disability support, and long-term care. It can also support autonomous life by covering the costs for accessible housing and transport. Social protection must account for disability-related extra costs across life stages. to support persons with disability to participate fully in the society rather than penalizing them for the barriers they face. This year, Inter-American Court of Human Rights recognized the right to care as a human right and linked it directly to the right to Social Security. In conclusion, we must shift the paradigm of social development. We must invest in care and support systems and universal social protection, grounded in human rights, as a foundation for inclusive and sustainable societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asako, for helping us understand the connection between care and support and human rights and social protection. It is obviously an intersection that seems to demand a lot from states. What is the role of states in realizing human rights in care and support?
Thank you. There are other experts in the panel who can also chip in on this point too, and then I would appreciate their support too. But for the right to social protection, the state is the primary responsible for delivering that right. So the state has to coordinate the service provision, mobilize resources through the domestic resources as well as through the international technical cooperation, and then also distribute it to ensure the essential minimum level of enjoyment of, for example, social protection or any other human rights relevant to care and support. And then also, state must work with business to ensure that business respect their human rights responsibility in their service delivery or as an employer. And then the states might be delivering those services directly by themselves, so they have to respect those rights there.
Thank you, Asako, for that response. And I also want to highlight a phrase that you said, care is not a burden. And of course, with the role of states working hand in hand, if necessary, with the private sector and with the social protection support, it should not feel like a burden anymore in the future. Let's hope so. Thank you, Asako. Moving on to our second panelist today, I welcome Valentina Contreras Orrego. Valentina is a program officer on public services and care at the Global Initiative for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. She will share with us her perspective on care and support as both a right and an essential public good needed for social development. Thank you, Valentina.
Thank you, Farah. Hi, everyone, and thank you for coming here for this conversation. As Roberto said and Asako said before me, we are 30 years now from the first time that delegations gathered in Copenhagen to address the three core themes of social development. By that time, that was poverty eradication, the promotion of full and productive employment, and decent work for all, and social integration. Although by that time social development looked really different, today is really the same situation for those who lack social integration, right? So it's equally painful for them. But one of the most critical issues that has largely remained unattended since then is care and support, as Asako has framed. This is one of the most critical issues, and it's the deepest and most structural dimensions of social development, as it's the core of everything, and we cannot support life itself without care and support. So as we say, we have to move on, or we have the challenge to move on now from what we call the society of carelessness, a society where caring for ourselves, for others, or for the planet is seen as a cost, something that slows economic growth instead of something good and productive for the society itself. And this model, as we know for sure, because we have research and data and so on, does not serve all. It's only serving a few. So we need to reimagine a shift towards what ECLAC calls the care society. This is the care society is actually the one where care moves to the very center of development, where progress is measured beyond GDP, and where also people's well-being is included in the sustainability of life. For this to happen, for this transition to happen, we need to have a very strong human rights foundation. And here's where economic, social, and cultural rights become really essential for this. So from this perspective, as Farah said, care for us, care and support is both a social right, but also a public good. So as a social right, it stems from the adequate standard of living that Article 11 of the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights already ensures everyone. And as a public good, it also requires public investments in care systems, care services, and policies that make rights like health, education, social security, decent work, and even healthy environment possible. So it's not just about care and support, but it's how care and support connects also with all other conditions of living. So in times where austerity is making a strong comeback in our societies and the world itself, recognizing care as a human right isn't just about women, as Asako said. It's about concrete, inclusive, and sustainable social development for all. That's what we are here today. So what's a real challenge? It's moving from the commitment to the implementation. So it's bringing to life the ambitions of the Pact of the Future, the political declaration of CSW 69, the Sevilla Commitment and Platform of Action, which have already been agreed so far, and the Tlatelolco Commitment, which has recently also been launched. So regarding this mission or this challenge that we have today, we have a twofold mission today. The first one is connecting agendas. So care can become the true foundation of tomorrow's society, with all four pillars of the human right to care, which for us are the right to care, the right to be cared, the right to self-care, but also the right to care for the environment. So we need to start connective movements across human rights, women's movements, labor movements, environmental ones, and so on. So everyone can have care and support as the foundation of their work. But we also have the challenge to bring care into practice, and that's not an easy one, right? So this is why, as the Global Initiative for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, we joined a regional project in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is called Initiatives to Strengthen Care Policies in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is led by GRAVE, UNRISD, the Global Alliance for Care, the Ford Foundation, and the IDRC, and whose objective is to connect researchers, but also policymakers across 8 countries in the region to design and to strengthen care systems under this approach. Which also brings visibility to both those who provide care and those who need care, as the concept explained by Asako before. So now the real question, when we are rethinking in this opportunity on the solution session also, as we rethink social development, a real question is not why care matters. We already know that, and we have all the commitments and all the documents that have passed before us to say that. The real question here is, in which ways can we make it the backbone of our societies? And also, how can we bring that to life with our commitments? So thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for highlighting some of the current challenges to enabling a care society, but also for emphasizing this concept of going from commitment to implementation. We know why care matters, but now it's a matter of putting things into practice, which is really hard. And you mentioned, connecting agendas, connecting researchers and policy. We've talked about a bit about the role of the state, but what do you think is the role of other sectors in society? Because care, as has been said before, is something that affects all of our humanity. It is pretty much the cornerstone of our human development. So everyone seems to have a responsibility in this. What is your opinion on that? On how can we make this public good a reality through all sectors of society?
I think the first one is obviously the state. So for us, as economic, social, and cultural rights are based on the state-wide. So the first commitment or the first responsibility is actually for states to provide public services. And this is really important to showcase because from an ESCR perspective, you already have, you don't have to start from scratch, right? You already have the standards that have been developed by the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights regarding public services. So you can take advantage of that. And also, coming from an ESCR perspective, it is really important to start somewhere. So you don't need to fulfill the whole thing up, but you can start somewhere and then increasing the conditions, complying with the covenant obligations. But also, of course, there's responsibility for other sectors. So this is why I'm showcasing here also as from civil society, which is our responsibility also to push forward and to connect those agendas. And that's what we are trying to do, but also from the private sector, but regulated by the state so they can comply with the conventional obligations as well.
Thank you, Valentina. It is a fascinating discussion to talk about where the responsibility lies. So I'm sure we're going to come back to that in our Q&A session later today. But now I would like to transition to our next panelist. And thank you, Olivier, for joining us today, Olivier de Schutter. Olivier is the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, and he will help us understand a little better the bidirectional relationship that exists between social protection and care. Social protection floors are key building blocks of strong care and support systems, but also care and support is a critical component of social protection services and social development. So to understand this interconnection, I would like to welcome Olivier de Schutter to our panel today. Welcome, Olivier.
Thank you very much indeed, Farah. And let me first of all express my gratitude to Make Mothers Matter for organizing this important session and for his opening remarks. Roberto Biso, as well as Valentina Contreras and Asako Hattori, for having highlighted the human rights dimensions of this debate. I would like to shift focus a little bit because I think we should realize that any progress we make in ensuring that social protection acknowledges the importance of care and support in societies will only be fully achievable if we value care work better in the world of work. Indeed, some social protection schemes, particularly old age pensions, unemployment benefits, but also maternity leaves, for example, or parental leaves more generally, rely on how much the work done is valued by the different sectors of society. And it's important to recall that globally, care work represents 11.5% of total employment. That is huge. That's 381 million people today in the world who perform work in the care economy. And 3/4 of this, as was noted earlier today, is performed by women as a result of the persistence of gender stereotypes and associated professional segregation. And as a result also of the fact that women spend much more time than men in providing care within households, within communities, without remuneration and recognition in many cases. They spend, according to data collected by the ILO, 4 hours, 25 minutes each day performing unpaid care work, in contrast or in comparison to men who spend 1 hour, 23 minutes each day on unpaid care work. And that is one of the reasons why we have so many working age women who remain outside the workforce due to the caring responsibilities they shoulder and to the social reproduction that they ensure. So I think we have to take this into account and understand how the improved valuing of care work can also contribute to strengthening social protection's contribution to protecting care and support. In fact, I presented to the United Nations General Assembly a report in October 2023 that discussed essentially how wages were set and what it meant to implement the principle of workers having a right to a fair remuneration as stipulated in Article 7 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. And that's part, of course, of the concept of a decent job. I was struck in preparing that report by how much essential work described thus during the COVID-19 pandemic was in fact undervalued. The ILO found that on average, essential workers earned 26% less than other workers. And only 2/3 of this gap could be explained by differences in education and experience. In other terms, the workers, mostly women, performing the most vital services for society, including in the care economy, were systematically underpaid. Now, why this discrepancy? Well, my report put forward 3 reasons or 3 explanations. First of all, the workers in the care economy provide services that serve communities, including people living in poverty who cannot afford to pay for those services. As a result, that work is underpaid because there is too little solvent demand. Work in the labor market is essentially valued on the basis of whose needs are served, and remuneration corresponds to where the purchasing power lies. So that's the first reason, and it goes back to what Asako mentioned, care work being a public good. The second reason is that the low remuneration of workers providing care can be attributed in many cases to the fact that most of the tasks associated with care were traditionally performed by women within households and communities, often without remuneration. It still is the case today. And even when these tasks are paid for, the wages are set at a very low level, reflecting this history of care work and the fact that society fails to recognize the value to society of the work of reproduction as contrasted with production. The activities of domestic workers, for example, activities such as cooking, cleaning, washing, caregiving, are undervalued systematically because they're oftentimes considered unproductive and because they have traditionally been assumed by women, whereas, of course, they are a valuable and necessary labor on which the functioning of communities and whole societies depend. The third reason is that in the activities that contribute to the care economy, even when they are remunerated, unionization rates are low, workers are not well organized, and work is often precarious. The bargaining position of workers in the care economy is often extremely weak. Now, this should not be allowed to continue. I argued in my report to the UN of 2023 that in order to be fair, the remuneration should reflect not only the economic value created by the worker, but also the contribution to society of the work performed when that work has positive externalities, provides a public good to society as it were. It is, in my view, absurd that jobs that are of most value to others, particularly to people in poverty, such as care, charity work, healthcare are some of the lowest paid, while others are paid so handsomely for jobs that in fact are toxic, are harmful to society. Financial trading, the production of fossil fuels, of plastics, of pesticides, of tobacco, or the advertising industry. Now, this should change. The levels of wages, that was the message of my report, are not set in the skies, nor are they simply the equilibrium point between the curves of supply and demand. The wages are the result of the bargaining positions of employers and workers, respectively, under the supervision of governments. And therefore, I call on governments to draw up a list of the most socially valuable professions and ensure that decent wages are paid to workers in those sectors. And I also urge them to cap salaries in the sectors that impose the highest costs to society. So I think we have to understand these interconnections between the valuation of work in the care sector and how social contribution can ensure that care and support are indeed recognized, valued in social security schemes, the two being interconnected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier de Schutter, for that incredible intervention and excellent point that you raise on the power of values and how we as a society are currently undervaluing something so important, which is care. And from the Make Mothers Matter perspective, I definitely would love to say that motherhood and the care that mothers provide is definitely undervalued in this world. And so thank you for bringing that to the forefront. But it really opens a really big question of how do we change values in our society, and how useful is policy if values don't align with it, right? So really policy is only as good as the culture that surrounds it. So you can have the best parental leave policy in the world, for example, but if your culture still whispers that you shouldn't take it, right, or quietly punishes those who do, then it obviously hampers the potential impact of these policies. So can you tell us what could be, from your perspective, a potential solution to aligning values and social norms with the commitments and the policy efforts that we see happening in care?
Farah, these are great questions. Let me make two remarks. Firstly, the only countries where we truly achieved gender equality are countries that introduced parental leaves that the fathers were forced to take alongside the mothers at separate times in order to force the fathers to take care of, small children during early childhood at a time when women had returned to work, when the mother had returned to work. And that was the case in Scandinavian societies. So I think those examples in Scandinavian countries show that it's possible to achieve true gender equality and rethink, in particular, the division of roles within the household, but that requires that kind of social engineering, if you wish. And my second remark is more directly related even to your question about value. I think there's a big myth that wages should be aligned with the productivity of workers. But that productivity is really a misnomer, because it forces us to look only at what the worker creates in terms of wealth that the employer may accumulate thanks to the exploitation of the workers' working time. It doesn't take into account the immense positive externalities that certain jobs provide to society. School teachers, doctors, nurses, people who support as social workers, access of people in poverty to social protection. All this is extraordinarily valuable to society, to social cohesion, and to the reduction of inequalities. It has strong positive benefits for society as a whole, but it's undervalued because that is not measurable in terms of gained productivity. And I think that is a problem. And we should repoliticize the question of wages rather than seeing them as simply the result of natural outcomes from market relationships.
Thank you very much, Olivier de Scutter, for that response and for shining light a little bit on the pragmatic challenges that we have with creating a care society today. And to explore a little more those pragmatic considerations of implementing care and support for social development, I would like to introduce our fourth and last panelist for today, Florencia Caro Sacchetti. Florencia is an associate researcher on social protection programs at CIPPEC, the Center for the Implementation of Public Policies for Equity and Growth in Argentina. She will be sharing with us examples of care systems implemented in Latin America. Thank you for being here, Florencia.
Thank you very much, Farah. It is a pleasure to be here among such a great group of speakers and their insightful presentations. So, going to your question, over the last decade, Latin America has moved care from the private sphere to the public agenda, turning it into a matter of rights, policy, and financing. So after decades of strong feminist advocacy, the region developed a very distinctive response to the urgent need to address care and support needs, which is the creation of national care systems, federal, national, or even subnational in some cases. So unlike isolated policies, these systems are integrated and multi-level, often bringing childcare, long-term care, and disability support under one coordinated umbrella. And these measures, with measures that also value and support unpaid caregivers and also paid care workers. So let me briefly highlight a few examples. First, as Roberto already mentioned, Uruguay stands as a pioneer in the creation of national care systems. And we know they created this national integrated care system in more than a decade ago after a participatory process that also took a few years and which recognized care and support as a social right and established state responsibility and interministerial coordination. This portfolio covers early childhood, disability, older persons' needs and services, plus also innovations such as support for caregiver cooperatives. More recently, we also have the case of Colombia, which has advanced its own national care and support system, rooted in the notion that care and support sustain life in its different forms, and also addresses the importance of intersectoral coordination. This system emphasizes also as a particular characteristic the need for strengthening community caregiving and addressing the needs of caregivers and care workers while also relying on very strong coordination across different levels and ministries. In Colombia, we also have a very landmark case of municipal care and support systems, which are the Manzanas del Cuidado or care blocks, which are a very successful local initiative. Care blocks represent these hubs that have very diverse activities related to education, training, leisure, and many other activities targeted as caregivers. So they give free time, offer services and training for them, while the persons for which they care for are cared for nearby. So there are also activities for the persons that normally these caregivers would be providing care and support. And this model, we also know that it has been adapted by, or is in the process of being adapted across many cities around the world with very different contexts. One example is Freetown in Sierra Leone, who are also working on the adaptation of care blocks to their own local context. Recently, we also have the case of Chile, who has been working on scaling a national care and support system with territorial networks. And the government has adopted this national support and care policy that goes from 2025 to 2030, charting the path towards a national support and care system. And this also positions care as a core pillar of social protection and central to reducing poverty and social inequalities. And the first action plan that is for this year and the next one sets clear strategic objectives and strengthens this intersectoral and interministerial coordination. We also have a growing momentum in Brazil, as an interministerial process has been in place in recent years, and a bill was approved last year to also create a national care and support policy and plan. Several others have advanced, though some still remain at early stages. In some cases, also shifts in government have altered priorities and slow progress, but we see that there's a clear momentum in the region to advance these care and support systems. And when we think, why are these good practices? Latin America's experience kind of proves that care and support systems are not a utopia. So with political will and adequate funding, governments can move from these scattered initiatives to integrated systems that better cater to the needs of families, including people who need care, caregivers, and care workers. So there are, I think, three features that are crucial for this to work. The first one, of course, is money. We cannot do nothing at all if we do not have a budget allocated to the creation, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of care and support systems. Second, of course, is this coordination, both multi-level and intersectoral, so we can articulate national policies with local implementation, but also have these spaces for coordination across social development, education, health, gender equality ministries, employment ministries, and many others. And the third one is this legal anchoring. So recognizing care and support as a right while assigning duties across different stakeholders and also assigning the funds needed to support these systems. And a landmark that happened this year that my colleagues have already mentioned and that kind of crystallizes this progress is the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, recognition of care as an autonomous and enforceable human right, because this, of course, provides a very powerful legal foundation for national and local care and support systems. And now governments have like a firm legal basis to invest, regulate, and deliver at scale that hopefully we will see them acting upon in the near future.
Thank you very much, Florencia, for sharing with us those concrete examples of how to successfully center care and social protection at the heart of social development, specifically in the Latin America region. You started mentioning a little bit the lessons learned from what your experience has been in Latin America. Can you tell us what would be your advice on best practices, lessons learned for other parts of the world?
Yeah, sure. I think that both for the rest of the world and for improvements in Latin America, because we also have still some challenges in Latin America. First, in terms of limited fiscal space and program continuity in the face of austerity. Second, data gaps, as we lack still regular time surveys, satellite accounts, service registries, and many others that also weaken this policy design, monitoring, and evaluation. Third, we have this incomplete institutionalization in terms of the integration with policies and institutions locally and nationally, with lack clear duties across ministries and sectors, budget lines, and lack of permanent coordination bodies that also reflects in terms of vertical coordination. So from these challenges that still exist in many of the systems across the region, I think there are four key lessons learned. The first one is that we need to put care and support systems in law and in the budget. As I was saying, without money, we cannot think about anything at all of this. So we need to understand that allocating money to care and support is not only addressing directly these care and support needs, but also it has a multiplier effect that can bring a lot of positive externalities to societies and economies across the world. Second, building this interministerial and multi-level space for coordination that also allows to better tackle this as an integrated policy challenge rather than an isolated, scattered initiative that is focused on one ministry only. Third one, also to coordinate with local governments. As we were saying before, maybe we have national policies, but in the end, we do need local implementation because it's local governments who are directly relating to the population. So we really need these spaces for coordination to integrate local partners. And fourth, we need to invest in data from day one. We need data to make sure that we can have feedback on the process, improve policies, and also kind of identify these care and support needs that sometimes we are working on the blind because we do not really have clear data on what is needed, what works, and so on. So we need money and law, coordination, and data to make sure that care and support systems work. So thank you very much.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Florencia. Now I would like to segue into a moderated discussion with our panelists, and I invite all our attendees to please enter your comments or questions in the Q&A function or chat. I know some have already come in, and some have also been pre-submitted during registration. So I'm going to go ahead and start this moderated discussion first by thanking all of our panelists for your valuable insights this morning from New York for me. I would like to start off with more of a philosophical question, which I think was Olivier kind of tackled it, but I would like to open up the opportunity to all the members of the panel. Valuing care is a challenge in steering up political will, societal will. Why do you think we as a society are okay with paying for roads, for example, but not for care, not for motherhood? What do you think is the biggest impediment, and how would you recommend the world address this? And anyone can start us off. Whoever feels inspired is welcome to start. Please go ahead, Olivier.
Maybe just one sentence. There is across the UN system a very strong movement to move beyond GDP in ensuring that we better value what counts. That movement has different versions. It includes the emphasis, of course, of the ILO and the Economic Commission of Latin America on the care economy, but it also includes the human rights economy concept promoted by the High Commissioner for Human Rights. A group of experts, a high-level group of experts, has been established to make proposals to governments as to how we could move beyond and complement GDP by well-being measures. And I think that goes very much at the heart of your question, Farah. We still remain wedded to the idea that the chief role of governments is to take policy measures that will increase wealth creation as measurable by GDP, contributing to total economic output. And I think that's a very problematic compass for action. At the same time, although with others we are developing this idea that for the realization of human rights we should move beyond growth and focus on something else, the single most important obstacle that we face is that many countries still face high levels of public debt. The total public debt of developing countries is around 30 trillion US dollars, and the total public debt for all countries is around 100 trillion US dollars. And when countries have high levels of debt, that debt servicing is only sustainable if they continue to have their economy grow. And so they will invest in roads, in infrastructures, or even sometimes in training people for jobs, where there is a measurable contribution to economic growth. And I think that's deeply problematic because it undervalues much of what matters, in fact. So the importance of this discussion should not be underestimated, but so should not be underestimated the political economy obstacles we face, and particularly the question of debt. It is telling, for example, and I close with this, that according to the latest count from UNCTAD, 3.7 billion people in the world live in countries that spend more on debt servicing than on healthcare or education. That's enormous. And that shows how many governments are constrained by debt servicing and therefore less able to invest in what matters most, which is care.
Well, that's an eye-opening statistic and an excellent point on how debt can be an impediment to investing in care. Although Roberto told us at the very beginning that investing in care is demonstrated that will bring greater economic returns than even investing in infrastructure, which is something that policymakers often, I guess, ignore and don't make decisions in that direction, as we already know. And yes, of course, moving beyond GDP is a critical movement in support of a care society. We are right now probably in a situation in which we optimize for growth, thinking that that is going to give us well-being, but we can just directly optimize for well-being if that is our ultimate purpose. Anyone else on the panel who would like to tackle the question of what is our biggest impediment to having policymakers and society as a whole value care more?
Maybe just, I'm sorry, Valentina, would you like to go first?
Go ahead, Asako.
Just very briefly, I think the gender stereotypes and the gender norms also matters here because the care and support has been seen as a private issue and then granted for free in the private sphere. And then women and girls and then families are the only one who can produce, and then that's a natural thing. But I think that kind of perception was kind of broken during the COVID lockdown period, that without those, actually the society stopped functioning. That's why there is the need for recognition of care and support as public good. Over.
Thank you, Valentina. I think you also had a thought you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, it's very aligned with what Asako said. I think if there is no roads, people can continue living on, and no one is going to step up and like build roads by themselves. But if care is not there, there's always someone that is going to fulfill that role, and usually it's women and girls. So we cannot sustain life without care and support. And that's like the core thing, and that's why it also remains unattended, because it's going to be there anyway, because we need to continue living on. So it's easier for from a policy perspective to stop investing in that because someone is going to do it anyway, you know? So for example, and I really agree with what Olivier said about GDP. So here I'm based in Chile, and the latest study showed that 16% of GDP actually equates for unpaid care and support labor. So there's a 16% only of unpaid labor that we are not taking into account and we are not investing in, and someone is already doing that work anyway. And they will not stop, even though those conditions are harming the rights and the health and the well-being of the population.
What a paradox, Valentina, right? It is so essential that we can get away with not investing in it because someone's going to do it anyway. Roberto, you had your hand up.
Yes, 2 points. On the issue of debt, yes, it's a tremendous problem for indebted countries where the budgets are severely limited because of that. There is an underlying problem, additionally, of women that got massively indebted personally during the COVID crisis to face the care needs of their families to a much greater proportion than men, and therefore emerged out of COVID not only overworked, but also personally indebted. And that is a additional serious social problems in many countries. On the question about so-called artificial intelligence, prefer to use the term large language models. I am just arriving from Bangalore to Doha, where we had a 2-day discussions in Bangalore, which is the technological capital of India, about artificial intelligence, so-called. And it's basically the social utility or even economic utility of large language models is far from being proven overall. What we are seeing is a financial bubble that can burst at any moment and creating even more severe problems. What we are seeing is negative social impacts in terms of jobs being substituted and so on. But in particular, in relation to care, it's a long known experience that babies being fed, kept warm, and taken care of the needs without human contact do not grow, get sick, even die. So care, human care, cannot be substituted by a machine in any case. Thank you.
Absolutely agree 100%, Roberto. And thank you for already starting to address some of the questions that are popping up in our chat. I have a question also from Elisa Valentin, who messaged us a question during her pre-registration, and I'm going to put it all together also with a question from Chantal Umuhosa from the Tanga community regarding multilateralism and international financial institutions. So the question is, the multilateral system is inundated by crisis of trust, shrinking budgets, and in many instances, reduced social and financial support. How can centering care help reinvigorate multilateralism and global cooperation? And then they highlight specifically also the role of international financial institutions in the care economy. Open to anyone on the panel. No thoughts on multilateralism?
I think, sorry if I can jump in.
Yes, please.
I think one of the main things for multilateralism and why it's like becoming increasingly distrust is because they get agreements every time, but after all, they don't comply with them in practice. So going back to my presentation, so the challenge is moving from this and stop like agreeing, okay, continue agreeing internationally, but also not stopping from becoming that reality in practice. And I think that's kind of the things, at least from CSOs, that really becomes a concern, because you can have several instruments. Like I said, like in the back of the future, you have like the GDP group that is working on things like going beyond measurement on GDP. But you also have, like in Sevilla commitment this year, a strong focus on investing on care economies and care systems, but you don't see that in practice. So what that means to agree something internationally or multilaterally when it doesn't have like correlation in practice. So I would say that for states could be a real solution, not only implementing like care systems, but going towards the care society, like culturally, socially, and especially economically.
Thank you, Valentina. Roberto, you had a thought to add?
Yes, I think I lost my connection for a moment. I am sure Olivia de Schutter explained about GDP and the need to reduce the dependence from it. And actually, one of the problems, multilateralism means many things. And some multilateral institutions, like the World Bank, that rely on the principles of $1, one vote, not one country, one vote, insist on GDP growth as the only objective and judgment of what countries do. And a lot of the harmful policies that exist are just done in terms of countries being pressed on the side of GDP growth. So we do not need to improve GDP by incorporating new factors into it, but to substitute GDP with a dashboard of indicators, one of which is definitely should be care, that allow to judge and to trace the perspective of countries in different ways. Now that will require a major shift in the paradigm, which is what this side event is all about. And this is something the governments have been saying, that we need to do that shift since the Earth Summit in 1992. But the resistance of those institutions is enormous. And SDGs also had that component. The very last goal of the SDGs is to create new measures, and that was never even actually started. Now we have some initiatives like the Vulnerability Index, Multidimensional Poverty Index, and Gender Equality Indexes, and so on, that should be part of that dashboard and that need to be further studied, promoted, and used in the evaluation, and not just GDP growth.
Florencia.
Thank you, Farah. Just a brief reflection, also building on what the colleagues have already mentioned. But I think that when we think about care in multilateral discussions, I think it's not still like mainstream, this idea of care as a cross-cutting priority. I think that care is kind of addressed through a gender equality lens, through an early childhood lens, through disability lens, like different dimensions of the care agenda. But in many spaces, especially in international financial institutions, this idea of care and support as these activities that underpin it all, it's still quite invisible. So I do think that trying to address and embrace in a way this notion of how nothing works if we don't have care and support, because we do not have healthy people who will, I don't know, then become workers. We don't even have markets if we cannot have care and quality care and support for all. So I think that this notion of making it clear how it's more than just a dimension of the gender equality agenda, more than a dimension of the early childhood agenda, more than a dimension of the older person's agenda, that can also help to try to strengthen its role in the multilateral discussion and try to work together on concrete proposals and deliver on previous commitments on care and support.
Thank you, Florencia. Yes, definitely integrating all the different areas of impact that care has would be very, very critical to making progress. Shifting a little bit from multilateralism to another aspect of the global context nowadays is this inclination for countries to promote austerity measures economically. It has been brought up by a couple of questions in the chat as well as in our pre-submission. How do you think this is affecting our ability to progress on the implementation of policies and commitments? And what are some of the realistic pathways going forward for the implementation of care societies? Does anyone have any thoughts on the current environment of austerity? Yes, Olivier.
Thank you, Farah. I think it's a reality that in many countries, there's now very clearly a shift towards austerity to basically ensure that countries can continue to borrow at affordable rates on the financial markets as they face very high levels of public debt resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures they put in place to protect households from the high inflation for food and energy prices in 2022. But the big problem here is that these austerity programs adopt a purely quantitative approach to reducing the public debt rather than a qualitative assessment of what needs to be prioritized. And I think one major difficulty is that investment in care is one that, as Roberto rightly said, has very high returns, but those returns will only materialize in a number of years. I worked on reducing child poverty, for example, and it's true, a child that is well nourished, that is taken care of, that is allowed to learn better at school, will, after 8, 10, 12 years, be much more able to learn and to be a productive adult, contributing taxes and social contributions. But that will not show up 6 weeks after the investment is made. It will show up 10 years after the investment is made. And I think there is a time horizon that is too long for many governments to take into account, and certainly for financial actors to take into account. So introducing a longer term perspective in the governance, in the macroeconomic governance is really key. And that is maybe also what's missing in the approach of international financial institutions that we discussed a minute ago.
100%, Olivier. Valentina, I think you had a thought to share.
Very specific things. I think, for example, we need also to move on to further connection of economic justice movements and care movements. Like, for example, why don't we have this conversation amidst the negotiation of the UN Tax Convention, for example? Why is this different when those kind of investment and money discussions finally are reflected on fiscal policies that are going to be paying off for social policies? So within governments, but also within civil society organizations, as Florencia very good said before, there is a fractioning. So we need to start having this conversation if we are going to move on to the care society, for this to be the core center of every discussion and every part. Also, if we are going to push, for example, for a debt convention from civil society, why are not we doing this also as the core fundament of the debt convention? And also, why are we talking about international cooperation here, where we have already the commitments in several instruments that have been agreed already? That's the first point. The second one is, as Olivier has said better than me, is going beyond GDP. I mean, we cannot sustain this model with GDP as the only or the sole model to measure progress or to measure development, because development is not made only by money. But the third one, and regarding the question that said, like, sometimes there is political will, and that's true. But again, the short term of political periods that need to be re-elected on the next one, they don't showcase how this could be really useful. So instead of valuing the core role of care at the center of every policy, they see it as a burden on top of everything else. So they don't, like, governments don't review every policy to say, okay, how we can include care and support within the cycle of policy that we already have, but they see it as a new one, and that becomes a burden for states as well. So yeah, long-term thinking is also a crucial point here.
Thank you very much, Valentina. Those are excellent points. Roberto and Asako, do you want to give us your thoughts briefly so we can move on to our next question and some questions from the audience as well?
Very briefly, governments say there is no money and we cut the social expenditure. But the reason very often why there is no money is because they have stopped taxing corporations and taxing the rich. So, of course, there is no money because they are not receiving the money that they could be receiving. And that happens both in developing and developed countries where the corporations and the extremely rich go untaxed. And the money for social protection, it has been demonstrated, is there. It's just that the governments don't raise it.
Yeah, just to add very quickly on additional point that maybe investment we are making is not most cost effective either. For example, the investing in institutional setting of care, like putting people in care institutions and providing care there, that's more costly, and then it's often deprives the possibility for people who are in care institution to continue contributing to the society. We are not, I mean, Roberto and Olivier mentioned the importance of investing in childcare so that there will be a future human capital, but we would also be investing in the human capital by supporting the autonomous life of people who need support, but with support will have a great contribution to the society. So we might also need to choose that what kind of investment we should make under the, if there is a limited resources. And then I would also say that there should be, as Roberto said, there should be an increase of the pie for the care and support, but could be those changes could be made even under current circumstances.
Thank you, Saka. That's an excellent point. A few of our panelists mentioned the gender perspective in the whole caring society discussion. We have a question from Evelyn Nicola on the chat, who asks us, do you think a women's strike movement and a day without women around the world should be supported in order to raise consciousness? Any thoughts on that?
I can reply that very personally. I think it could and it should, especially because that could showcase a way in which, like I said before, like if care is not there, someone is going to take it anyway. So if it's not there and there's no one available to take on those functions, it's actually going to showcase, as happened during the pandemic, that women and girls were not there to support everyone. And I think that also connects actually with the ESCR framework, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights framework, which also shows that human rights are collective things, not individual ones. So I cannot just demand that for myself, but I need my community for that. So I think it's a very good like pushing measure.
Any other thoughts on that? No.
Yeah, the right to strike should not be reserved to waged workers. I think it's a great idea. And I think human rights have never made progress without that kind of struggle.
Absolutely. Excellent point. So we do talk a lot about the complexity of care systems. We talk about the multiple roles of society. We talk about the need for more of a long-term perspective versus a short-term perspective, the cross-sectoral aspect of it, the multidimensional aspect of it. It's sometimes, because it's a system, it's difficult to pinpoint the responsibility and the accountability, right, for the success of the whole system. Of course, every component can be responsible for its own contribution, but who is ultimately responsible, or who's ultimately accountable to make the system work, in your opinion? Roberto, go ahead.
Can I jump in? Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
think that accountability is quite clear if we talk in terms of human rights, the states are the duty bearer of the human rights system. And theirs is the first accountability and the responsibility to promote, defend, and make other actors responsible for that. So that's precisely the importance of recognizing the right to care and support, which is to strengthen and generate and clarify the accountability mechanism as a primary responsibility.
Yes, Olivia.
Thank you, Farah. I think there is a major stake in ensuring that within government ministries of finance do not dictate their conditions on others. And there's a distinction to be made between what might be called the right hand of the state and the left hand of the state. The left departments, in my experience, that work on employment, social affairs, health, education, usually defer to the judgment of the Ministry of Finance as to where the budgetary priorities should be set. And they are the a variable, I mean, healthcare, education, and so on, that may have to accept certain conditions imposed on them. So they work under the conditions that are imposed on them by the Ministry of Finance. And I think that mending this governance distortion is really key. And we can do this, or we should do this, by encouraging countries to move back to soft planification. I mean by soft planification, not the the quota system of the 5-year plans under the the Soviet Union as we knew it, but long-term planning nevertheless, so that multi-year strategies are approached to remedy those important imbalances. Otherwise, we have governments who will only respond to crisis when it's already very late to make a difference, and will otherwise be have their policies dictated by what the markets command or what their external dependencies require. So I think reintroducing a reflection on how governance works, how long-term planning can be taken into account, and how the left hand of the state can be reinforced against the right hand of the state is really important.
Fascinating. Asako?
Yeah, thank you. My intervention may not be as elaborated as to previous responders or more pragmatic, but just to highlight a couple of points. One is that the advisory opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, mentioned by many speakers, clarified that the care is a human right and the state has a primary responsibility to deliver. And then it elaborated what's the role of the state. So just echoing to previous respondents that state has a primary responsibility for that. And then also Olivier mentioned that the certain part of the government might be imposing the financial condition over the government, but it's a bit similar that maybe we are thinking in the one set of pie which we think that it cannot be expanded. So the current the conventional thinking is that there is a pie of the resource, and then that has to be divided between those who are providing care and support and those receiving care and support. So I'm just linking into one of the questions mentioned that it's very hard to convince the care recipient to pay for the work delivered. So it's a very difficult negotiation between the care providers, care workers, and the recipients of care. But that's because we are thinking in the set of pie, which we think that cannot be expanded, and then we are made to compete within the same size of the pie. But as we have been discussing, that if the care is so fundamental to the functioning of the society, then there need to be the discussion that the pie has to be enlarged so that the rights of the care workers and the unpaid caregivers, and then those the needs of those who are requiring care and support has to be met in a bigger part of the bigger size of the pie. Because if the care workers don't enjoy the decent work, they cannot provide human rights-based support or human rights-based care to those who are in need. And who are those in need are not necessarily have enough purchasing power to negotiate those prices either. Therefore, there would be the role of the states to provide public services or provide social protection or ensure the decent work so that in the bigger size of the pie, the human rights of both sides can be protected.
Thank you so much, Asako. And I know, Valentina, you have a thought, but I need to move us along. Do you want to say something very briefly? Please go ahead.
Yes, just a final thought. Like, I think whenever decisions on care and support are made, they always are made thinking of the care providers and those who need care as other people. So there's also a need to be conscious that all of us require care, all of us provide care, and that's like a cultural and social discussion. We have launched recently a campaign on that, and I'm going to leave the material in the chat.
Thank you so much, Valentina. And thank you all, everyone in our panel, for this fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, we only have 5 minutes left, and there's a lot to unpack on this topic. And so thank you for all your insights and providing clarity and direction to some of the big questions around care and support and social development. I would now like to invite Yara Tarbulsi, Outreach and Advocacy Officer at the Global Alliance for Care, for some closing remarks. And then if we have time, we'll go into a quick round robin of closing comments for each of our panelists. Thank you, Yara. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Farah, and thanks to MMM, all of the organizers of this event, and all of the panelists also for such a rich conversation, which I'm not going to claim to summarize while also doing it justice to all of the points that were expressed, but I do want to maybe highlight a few key takeaways to this conversation. First of all, I think one of the arguments that have come out most clearly, and I think we can all agree on, is that the centrality of care to our economies and to the daily functioning of our society means that it should be embedded as a key principles for our political and social systems, to all types of policy making, and that includes to social protection systems. So care should be an essential part of social protection systems, and that these same social protection systems are critical to transforming the social organization of care. This is important considering that care work itself acts as an informal safety net, social safety net in times of crisis and conflict, when infrastructure breaks down and care needs increase, but this happens without any type of recognition and adequate reward. On the other hand, as many panelists have said, formal social protection systems, and particularly social security, are exclusionary on the basis of also not valuing care work and also valuing what it considers to be between quotation marks productive work. And this effectively excludes women who have dedicated their lives to unpaid care work, persons with disabilities, informal care workers, domestic workers, etc. According to the International Covenant on Economic and Social and Cultural Rights, social protection should be a right for everyone, regardless of their economic activity or employment status. And as we've also heard today, that care services can also be delivered through social protection systems, and that can contribute greatly to recognizing, reducing, and redistributing care work. We've also listened to some really great best practices, and particularly from Latin America, which has really paved the way for the care agenda and shown us how care can be placed at the center of policymaking. I'd also like to highlight two more specific measures that have been taken to also place care at the center of social protection. Particularly in France, there's a strategy for caregivers, which includes special leave permits and daily allowance for caregivers, and a special retirement fund for caregivers. And Mexico, on the other hand, has also been notable for its effort to register and affiliate domestic workers who are often in conditions of informality to Social Security. But as all of our panelists have said, there's still a lot to be done, especially if we really want to position care not just as a central element of the gender equality agenda, but the social development agenda as a whole. And all of the topics we're talking about at the World Social Summit, eradicating poverty, decent work, and social inclusion. First of all is valuing care and positioning it as a policy priority across different sectors and levels of government and promoting interinstitutional coordination. Second is financing these policies through sustainable and progressive measures. And finally, promoting dialogue between those who provide and receive care and support and decision makers, and having inclusive participatory processes across all levels of policymaking. Finally, I'd like to close saying that exploring this intersection is really crucial and critical at this moment in the World Social Summit, given all of the topics that we've previously mentioned that are being discussed: poverty, decent work, social inclusion. And even though it's been a busy year in the multilateral sphere, it's going to be important to keep pushing for the care agenda through this holistic and comprehensive lens, despite the landscape looking fraught right now. But there are still many important moments that are going to come up where this transformative vision is going to be critical to position, CSW 72, for example. And we also will need to develop actors, policymakers' capacities to implement, or even our partners' abilities to advocate for this vision and these policies in these spaces through knowledge exchange, producing data and evidence, and also disseminating and analyzing best practices. Finally, there's a really important need for a powerful narrative, for us to work on a powerful narrative concerning care, which will be central to valuing it and also redistributing it through different policies. And these are all things I'd like to close by saying that we are trying to do as the Global Alliance for Care, and not just as a secretariat which is working and coordinating activities, but really building on the collective intelligence of all of our members, many of whom are here already: MMM, CIPPEC, OHCHR, GI-ESCR, all important and major players who are making this work happen. So it's been really inspiring to share this space with you, and I really think that this is the kind of advocacy and reflections that are going to help us transform care and support system and social protection systems with a gender equality and human rights approach. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Yara. I know that we are already 1 minute over our finalizing time, but I would like to ask our panelists if you can give us, in a quick round robin, a 30-second final message for our audience to take away with them today. And I'll start with Valentina in the order in which I see it on my screen.
Yes, just to say that keep pushing for the connection of the movements. We have still COP, we have G20, we have CSW next year. So there's several other spaces where we can still connect these movements and this topic, especially from an ESCR perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Florencia?
Yes, I also supporting a little bit of what we've already discussed, but I think we need to reinforce and keep pushing together for this idea of care as the core pillar of our economic and social system worldwide, and also ensure law, money, and coordination. Thank you.
Asako?
Yeah, I also echo that we are stronger, we are stronger. Together, we are stronger. And then also just to highlight that the UN system issued a policy paper on how to transform care systems, and then concrete action suggestions are there. So it was shared with the chat. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Roberto?
I can only re-emphasize that care policies and the recognition of care rights is already reality, with all the shortcomings and problem effects, but it is a reality in many countries thanks to the mobilization of civil society and particularly the women groups. So what we are talking about is not utopia, it's possible, and it's possible in the short term.
And to round us off, Olivier?
Thank you, Farah. Just one word to say that maybe one step we need to take is to demand from all countries that they review the social protection systems they have in place to ensure that it does not negatively impact care work and those, mostly women, contributing to it. When I was on the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, we adopted a very important decision concerning Ecuador. This was the case of Trujillo Calero versus Ecuador. The decision we adopted was from 17th of May 2015. And essentially what we said there is that a woman denied pension rights because the years she spent taking care of children, of older persons, were not taken into account, was a violation of her rights. Essentially, the pension system in Ecuador, we found, was not recognizing that care deserves to be valued just like remunerated work. And I think it's one decision only, but it is a call for all countries, of course, that want to be compliant with human rights to make this assessment of their social security systems. And I hope we can push for them to make this self-examination. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you to all our panelists. On behalf of Make Mothers Matter, I thank all our speakers today for your perspectives and contributions. I would also like to thank our partner organizations for joining forces, not only to make this event possible, but also to fuel global advocacy efforts for care and support as cornerstones of human development. Thank you to the entire Make Mothers Matter team, Valerie, Shahnaz, Gizem, who were instrumental in putting together this event. And to our attendees, thank you for joining us. And please stay in touch with us to continue the conversation. You can email us at info@makemothersmatter.org and follow us on social media. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
And thank you to you for your moderation, Farah. Excellent.
Thank you.